It's so good to be with you today. I believe God has something special in store for you. I want to talk to you about lifting up your eyes. Too often we go through life looking down at our problems, down at our past, down at the disappointments. We let the weight of circumstances keep us focused on the ground. But that's not where you're meant to be looking. The scripture says, lift up your eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Maybe today you feel stuck. You've been looking at the same closed doors, the same financial struggle, the same medical report. But can I encourage you, it's time to shift your focus. Stop looking at what's wrong and start looking at what's possible. Stop looking at how big the problem is and start looking at how big your God is. When you lift up your eyes, you'll see new opportunities. You'll see favor that you didn't expect. You'll see doors opening that you couldn't open on your own. But if you stay focused on the obstacles, you'll miss the miracles. Abraham was in a dry season when God told him, lift up your eyes and look to the north, south, east, and west. As far as you can see, I will give it to you. Notice, God didn't say, look at what you don't have, look at how bad it is. No, he said, look beyond. See beyond. What you focus on will determine what you walk into. You may be facing challenges today, but if you'll lift up your eyes, you'll realize you're not in this alone. The God who spoke worlds into existence is fighting for you. He's working behind the scenes. He's lining up the right people, the right breaks, the right moments. I believe and declare that as you lift up your eyes, you're going to see new levels of favor. You're going to walk into divine opportunities. And you're going to step. Life has a way of keeping us focused on the immediate, the struggles, the setbacks, the challenges that seem to surround us. When difficulties arise, it's natural to let our eyes drop, to feel weighed down by disappointment, fear, or uncertainty. But if you always focus on what's in front of you, you may miss what's beyond you. You may only see the problem when there's actually a solution on the way. You may only see the loss when restoration is just around the corner. Think about a person walking through a foggy valley. If all they do is look around, all they'll see is mist, uncertainty, and obstacles. But if they lift their eyes to the mountains, they'll see that the sun is still shining. They'll realize that the fog is temporary and that a higher perspective can change everything. The same is true in life. If we live with our focus only on what's right in front of us, we can become discouraged. We can lose hope. We can start to believe that where we are now is where we will always be. But that's not true. Imagine a child playing with a small toy, completely absorbed in it. When suddenly it breaks to that child, it feels like the end of the world. They may cry, feeling like nothing can make it better, but from a parent's perspective, they know something greater. They know that there's a bigger toy store down the street, filled with better toys, new opportunities, and greater joy. In the same way, sometimes we get so fixated on what we've lost or what isn't working that we forget there is something greater ahead. When we lift up our eyes, we begin to see beyond the temporary setback and realize that better things are on the horizon. In life, you will always have opportunities to focus on the struggle. The medical report doesn't look good. The business isn't growing the way you hoped. The relationship you thought would last forever suddenly fell apart. If you stay fixated on those things, you can miss the bigger picture. You can let disappointment keep you stuck, looking down instead of forward. But what if you made a decision today to shift your focus? What if you decided that no matter what comes your way, you're going to keep looking up? There's a story in the Bible about a man named Abraham. He was in a season of waiting, a season where it looked like his promise wasn't going to come to pass. God had told him that he would be the father of many nations. Yet years had gone by and he still didn't have a child. Abraham could have easily let his circumstances keep him discouraged. He could have stayed focused on what wasn't happening. But instead, God told him something powerful. He said, lift up your eyes and look to the north, south, east, and west. As far as you can see, I will give it to you. Think about that. God was telling Abraham that his ability to receive was connected to his ability to see. If he only focused on where he was, on the barrenness, on the waiting, on what wasn't happening, he would have stayed stuck. But when he lifted his eyes, when he chose to see beyond his current reality, that's when things began to shift. Maybe today, you're in a season where it feels like nothing is changing. Maybe you've been believing for something, but it seems delayed. The key is not to get discouraged, but to lift up your eyes. Choose to see beyond where you are now. Choose to believe that God has more in store. There was a man flying in an airplane on a cloudy day. From the ground, it looked gray and dreary. Rain was falling and everything seemed dark. But as the plane climbed higher, it broke through the clouds. And suddenly, there was sunlight, blue sky stretched as far as the eye could see. The clouds hadn't disappeared. They were still there below, but the man's perspective had changed. He was no longer under the storm. He was above it. That's what happens when you lift up your eyes. The storm may still be there, but you're no longer controlled by it. You've risen above it. In the same way, when challenges come, you have a choice. You can stay focused on the difficulty, or you can choose to lift up your eye. You can choose to believe that better days are ahead. You can choose to trust that even when things don't make sense, there's a greater plan unfolding. Some of the most successful people in history didn't get there because they never faced obstacles. They got there because in the middle of the difficulty, they kept their eyes on the vision. They refused to let the present moment define their future. When Thomas Edison was inventing the light bulb, he failed over 1,000 times. He could have looked at those failures and given up. He could have said, this will never work. But instead, he chose to lift his perspective. He famously said, I have not failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that won't work. His ability to keep looking forward rather than focusing on the failure is what led him to success. Maybe in your own life you faced disappointments. Maybe things haven't turned out the way you planned, but this is not the time to stay discouraged. This is the time to lift up your eyes. See beyond the challenge. See beyond the disappointment. Believe that new opportunities are coming, that favor is on the way, that the best is yet to come. When you lift up your eyes, you'll begin to see things differently. You'll realize that what looked like a setback was actually a setup for something greater. You'll start to recognize that the delay wasn't a denial, it was just preparation. You'll begin to trust that even when things feel uncertain, you're being led to something better. So don't let life keep you looking down. Don't let the weight of the moment keep you from seeing what's ahead. Make a decision today to lift up your eyes, to believe again, to hope again, to trust that the best is still in front of you. When you do, you'll find that what once seemed impossible suddenly becomes possible. You'll see doors open, opportunities arise, and new levels of favor unfold. Lift up your eyes. Your best days are still ahead. Life is filled with moments that test us. We all go through seasons where things don't make sense, where the report isn't what we wanted, where the doors we thought would open remain closed, where the path forward seems uncertain. In those moments, it's easy to let worry take over. It's easy to focus on what's wrong, on what could go wrong, on all the reasons things may not work out. But living in fear never leads to victory. Allowing doubt to control your perspective will only hold you back from what's possible. Every day we have a choice to let uncertainty dictate our emotions or to stand firm, trusting that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about deciding which reality you'll focus on. Will you focus on the problem, or will you choose to see the potential? Will you dwell on the obstacles, or will you shift your attention to the possibilities? When you decide to shift your mindset, everything begins to change. Consider a person walking through a dense forest. If they spend all their time staring at the tangled branches and uneven path in front of them, they may start to feel trapped, overwhelmed, even lost. But if they take a step back, if they look up and see the sunlight filtering through the trees, they'll realize they're not stuck at all. There's a way forward. There's a path they hadn't noticed before. The same is true in life. When difficulties come, it's easy to focus only on what's in front of us. But if we shift our gaze, we'll often see that what looked like a dead end was actually just a bend in the road. Many times, the things we fear never even happen. We waste time and energy worrying about outcomes that never come to pass. How many times have you stayed up at night, anxious about something, only to realize later that it wasn't worth the stress? How often have you replayed worst-case scenarios in your mind, only to look back and see that everything worked out in ways you never expected? That's why choosing to approach life from a place of strength rather than fear is so important. It's easy to be confident when everything is going smoothly. But real confidence is built in uncertainty. Strength isn't developed in comfort, it's developed in challenge. Every great leader, every innovator, every person who has accomplished something significant has had moments of doubt. They've faced circumstances where they could have let uncertainty stop them, but instead of backing down, they pushed forward. They didn't let fear define them. They chose to look beyond the moment and see the greater picture. There's a story about a man who found himself in the middle of a storm while sailing. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and the rain was relentless. Fear could have paralyzed him. He could have let the storm dictate his next move, but instead he focused on the lighthouse in the distance. No matter how rough the waters became, he kept his eyes on that light. And because he did, he made it safely to shore. The storm was real, the danger was real, but his ability to focus on something greater kept him moving forward. In life, challenges will come. There will be seasons when things feel overwhelming, when the obstacles seem too big, when the path forward isn't clear. But that's when the decision becomes even more important. Will you allow the difficulty to control you, or will you rise above it? Will you let the fear dictate your choices, or will you move forward with confidence, knowing that something greater is ahead? A powerful example of this can be seen in history. There have been countless moments when individuals had every reason to give up. They had every reason to stop believing, to stop pushing forward, to accept that things wouldn't change. And yet, those who made the greatest impact were the ones who refused to be held back by fear. They were the ones who kept pressing on, even when the odds seemed impossible. One of the most well-known inventors of all time went through failure after failure before finally discovering what would change the world. There were times when it seemed hopeless. There were moments when he could have said, this is never going to work. But instead of focusing on the failure, he focused on the possibility. Instead of letting the difficulty define him, he let his vision pull him forward. The same principle applies to everyday life. Maybe you face setbacks. Maybe things haven't turned out the way you planned. Maybe you've been believing for something, but the results haven't come. In those moments, the choice is critical. You can either focus on what's wrong, on what's missing, on what hasn't happened, or you can choose to see the possibility. Some of the greatest breakthroughs happen right after the hardest moment. The people who refuse to quit, who refuse to let fear win, who refuse to back down, are the ones who go further than they ever imagined. They're the ones who discover that just beyond the challenge was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. One of the best ways to move forward when facing difficulty is to remind yourself of past victories. Think about the times in your life when things seemed uncertain, but they worked out. Remember the moments when you didn't see a way, but somehow the door opened. The same will be true this time. The same way you made it through before, you'll make it through again. Instead of looking at what could go wrong, start looking at what could go right. Instead of dwelling on the struggle, start focusing on the breakthrough that could be around the corner. When you change your perspective, you change your direction. When you choose to believe that something greater is ahead, you open the door for things to shift in your favor. So no matter what you're facing today, don't let fear win. Don't let the challenges define you. Look beyond the problem and see the possibility. Trust that the best is still ahead. Keep pressing forward. Keep believing. Keep expecting great things, because when you do, you'll find that what once seemed impossible is suddenly within reach. What once felt like a roadblock is now just a stepping stone to something greater. Stay confident. Stay hopeful. Keep moving forward. Your best days are still to come. Life has a way of throwing challenges in our path, moments that test our patience, our faith, and our strength. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when faced with obstacles that seem too big to overcome. The weight of disappointments, delays, and difficulties can make it tempting to settle, to stop expecting, to assume that this is just the way things will always be. But what if the very thing you're facing isn't meant to defeat you, but to remind you of something greater? Many times when we're in the middle of a struggle, we focus on what's wrong, what's missing, what's not working. It's human nature to magnify the problem and forget the bigger picture. But no matter how great the difficulty, there's always something greater beyond it. No matter how impossible things seem, there's a power that goes beyond what you can see, beyond what you can figure out, beyond what seems logical. There's an old saying, the size of your problem is nothing compared to the size of the answer. Too often we let the difficulty determine our attitude. We let the setback convince us that things won't change. We let the negative voices drown out what we know deep down, that there's more ahead, that this isn't the end, that what looks like a setback is actually a setup for something greater. Think about a small child who gets scared in the dark. To them, the shadows on the wall seem huge, frightening, and real. They imagine all kinds of dangers, convinced that something is lurking in the corner. But the moment a parent walks in and turns on the light, the fear disappears. The reality never changed. The room was always safe, but the child's perception of it did. In the same way, when you focus on what's going wrong, it can feel overwhelming. But when you take a step back and shift your perspective, you'll realize that what once seemed impossible is actually temporary. That the challenge isn't as big as you thought when you recognize the greater picture. There's a story about a group of people who were sent to scout out a new land. It was a land filled with abundance, with opportunity, with everything they had been waiting for. But when they returned, the report wasn't about the potential. They only talked about the obstacles. They focused on how big the giants were, how strong the opposition seemed, how impossible the challenge looked. Because they magnified the problem, they missed out on the promise. Only 2 of them saw it differently. They looked at the same situation, but instead of seeing defeat, they saw opportunity. Instead of seeing giants, they saw victory. Instead of focusing on what seemed impossible, they focused on the possibilities. What you focus on matters. If you focus on how difficult the challenge is, it will feel impossible. If you focus on what you don't have, you'll always feel like you're lacking. But if you shift your perspective, if you remind yourself that there's more to the story, that you're not in this alone, that the challenge is only temporary, suddenly you'll find strength you didn't know you had. There's a well-known story about a young man facing what seemed like an unbeatable opponent. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the most experienced, he wasn't the one people expected to win. Yet when he stepped onto the battlefield, he wasn't intimidated, he didn't back down. While everyone else saw an undefeatable giant, he saw an opportunity for victory. While others cowered in fear, he stepped forward with confidence, knowing that there was something greater backing him up. He didn't rely on his own ability, he relied on a greater source of strength. And because of that, he overcame what seemed impossible. Maybe today you're facing something that feels overwhelming. Maybe you're looking at a situation that seems too big, too complicated, too difficult to handle. The key is not to focus on the problem, but to focus on the possibilities. Not to dwell on what's missing, but to believe in what's ahead. Because when you shift your focus, when you stop magnifying the difficulty and start magnifying the possibilities, things begin to change. It's like a pilot flying through a storm. The turbulence can be intense. The wind can shake the plane and the rain can reduce visibility, but the pilot doesn't panic because they know something the passengers don't. They know that if they climb high enough, they'll break through the storm. They understand that beyond the clouds, the sky is still clear, the sun is still shining, and peace is still waiting. In the same way, when you stop letting the storm dictate your outlook and start reminding yourself that there's something greater above, you'll find peace even in the middle of the difficulty. One of the most powerful things you can do is remind yourself of past victories. Think back to times in your life when things seemed impossible, yet somehow they worked out. Remember the moments when you didn't see a way, but the right opportunity showed up. Just as you made it through before, you'll make it through again. Just as doors opened in the past, doors will open in the future. There's an old saying, don't tell your God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big your God is. It's all about perspective. If you focus on what's going wrong, you'll feel overwhelmed. But if you shift your attention to what's possible, to what's ahead, to the fact that things can turn around at any moment, you'll find new strength, new confidence, and new opportunities. So no matter what you're facing today, don't let the challenge define you. Don't let the obstacles convince you that things won't change. Choose to believe that there's something greater ahead. Choose to focus on what's possible instead of what's difficult. Choose to remind yourself that the challenge is only temporary, but the victory is permanent. You may not see the answer yet, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. You may not know how things will work out, but that doesn't mean they won't. Keep your focus on what's ahead. Keep reminding yourself that the best is still to come. Because when you shift your perspective, you shift your future. And when you stop letting the obstacles intimidate you and start recognizing that there's something greater backing you up, you'll find yourself stepping into victories you never imagined. Stay hopeful. Stay strong. Keep believing, because your greatest moments are still in front of you. Life is full of unexpected turns, moments where the path ahead seems uncertain and challenges appear larger than we ever imagined. It's easy to feel weighed down by disappointment, setbacks, or the feeling that things are not changing fast enough. In these times, our perspective determines everything. How we see the situation, how we respond, and what we choose to focus on can shape the outcome in ways we may not even realize. Every person faces moments where doubt creeps in. Thoughts come that whisper, it's never going to change. This is too big for you. You're not strong enough. If we allow those thoughts to take root, they can limit our potential. They can cause us to settle, to stop reaching, to believe that what we see now is all there will ever be. But just because a challenge looks permanent doesn't mean it is. Just because you don't see a way doesn't mean there isn't one. Think about a seed planted deep in the soil. If you were to look at that ground, you wouldn't see anything happening. Days pass, weeks go by, and still nothing appears on the surface. To the untrained eye, it may seem like nothing is changing, but beneath the soil, something powerful is taking place. The roots are growing, the foundation is being established, and when the time is right, that seed will break through the ground and flourish. Many times in life, we're in a season where it feels like nothing is happening. We're waiting, believing, pushing forward, but we don't see the results we expected. It's easy to think that because we don't see progress, nothing is working. But what if the breakthrough is already in motion? What if things are shifting beneath the surface? Just because you can't see it yet doesn't mean it's not on the way. There's a story about a man who was struggling to move forward. He had tried everything he knew, worked hard, stayed committed, yet he felt stuck. One day he met a mentor who told him, you're looking at your situation the wrong way. You're seeing it as a barrier, but what if it's actually a bridge? The man didn't understand at first, but as he thought about it, he realized that the very challenge he was facing was preparing him for the next level. The struggle wasn't there to stop him, it was there to strengthen him. Sometimes what looks like a setback is really a setup. The difficulty is not there to hold you back, but to position you for something greater. The job loss may feel like an ending, but what if it's actually making space for a better opportunity? The delay may seem frustrating, but what if it's protecting you from something you can't yet see? The disappointment may feel unfair, but what if it's redirecting you towards something far beyond what you originally planned? Perspective is everything. Two people can go through the same challenge, yet one comes out defeated while the other rises stronger. The difference isn't in the challenge itself, it's in how they see it. When you shift your perspective, you shift your experience. Think about a storm rolling in. From the ground, it may seem dark, heavy, and endless. But if you were to rise above the clouds, you'd see that the storm is only temporary. Above it, the sun is still shining, the sky is still clear, and peace still exists. The same is true for life's difficulties. If you stay focused on the challenge, it can feel overwhelming. But if you take a step back, if you remind yourself that it's not permanent, that there's something greater beyond it, you'll find new strength to keep going. Some of the most successful people in history faced unimaginable challenges. They had moments where everything seemed to be working against them. They could have given up. They could have let the struggle convince them that their dreams were impossible. But instead, they chose to keep believing, to keep pushing forward, to see the obstacle as part of the journey rather than the end of the road. One of the most well-known inventors in history failed thousands of times before he succeeded. If he had let failure define him, we wouldn't have the technology we rely on today. Another leader faced repeated rejection, being told he wasn't good enough, but he refused to let other people's opinions determine his destiny. He chose to see each rejection as a stepping stone, not a roadblock. That perspective allowed him to rise to a level beyond what anyone expected. Maybe in your own life, you're facing something that feels unfair, something that doesn't seem to be changing. It's tempting to look at it and think this is just how it's going to be. But what if you decided to see it differently? What if instead of seeing the difficulty as an end, you chose to see it as part of the process? Imagine a sculptor working on a masterpiece. From the outside, all you see is rough stone, pieces being chipped away. It may look like destruction, but in reality, it's transformation. The sculptor isn't damaging the stone. He's revealing what was always inside. The same is true in life. Sometimes the struggles we face are shaping us, refining us, preparing us for something greater. If we only focus on what's being taken away, we'll miss the masterpiece being formed. The next time you face a challenge, ask yourself, is this really a limitation, or is it an opportunity in disguise? Could it be that what looks like a closed door is actually leading you to a better one? Could it be that what feels like rejection is actually redirection? When you shift your mindset, you'll find strength you didn't know you had. You'll start seeing possibilities where you once saw problems. Life isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about how you approach them. When you choose to believe that every obstacle has the potential to move you forward, you'll stop fearing the difficulties and start looking for the lessons within them. You'll begin to recognize that every delay, every challenge, every unexpected turn is shaping you for something greater. So don't let the struggle define you. Don't let the difficulty convince you that things won't change. Instead, choose to see the bigger picture. Choose to believe that what's in front of you is not there to break you, but to build you. Because when you shift your perspective, you'll find strength, resilience, and opportunities you never imagined. Stay hopeful, stay strong, keep moving forward, because the best is still ahead. Life has a way of bringing unexpected moments, times when we feel stuck, when the road ahead seems uncertain, when the dreams we once held close appear distant. In these moments, it's easy to become discouraged, to believe that the difficulties we face are too great, that we missed our chance, or that things will never change. But what if the very situation that feels like an obstacle is actually an opportunity in disguise? What if the season of waiting, of struggle, of uncertainty is not a sign of defeat, but a setup for something greater? There's a tendency in human nature to focus on what's not working. We see the challenges, the delays, the closed doors, and we assume that they are signs that we should stop hoping, stop believing, stop expecting. But more often than not, the very things that seem like setbacks are actually positioning us for something better. When one door closes, it's easy to feel like we've reached the end. But what if that door was never meant to be the final destination? What if it was simply a detour leading to something greater? Think about the process of refining gold. Gold in its raw form is mixed with impurities. It has to go through intense heat to be purified. If you were to judge it in the middle of the process, you might think it was being destroyed. But in reality, the fire isn't harming it. It's bringing out its true value. The same is true in life. Sometimes the struggles we face are not there to weaken us, but to refine us, to strengthen us, to prepare us for what's ahead. When we focus only on what's wrong, we limit our ability to see what's possible. If we constantly dwell on the difficulties, we miss the opportunities hidden within them. There's a story of a man who was working toward a dream, giving everything he had, but nothing seemed to be changing. He became frustrated, convinced that all his effort was in vain. But what he didn't realize was that every step he was taking, every challenge he was overcoming, was preparing him for the very thing he had been waiting for. What looked like a delay was actually a season of preparation. Many times what we see as a dead end is really just a turning point. The challenge isn't there to stop us. It's there to redirect us. There are countless stories of people who faced rejection, setbacks, and obstacles that seemed impossible, only to later realize that those very moments were shaping them for their greatest success. A musician who was told they would never make it. A writer who faced rejection after rejection before finally finding the right opportunity. A leader who failed multiple times before discovering the right path. If you look at your own life, you'll likely find moments where things didn't go as planned, but in hindsight, they led you somewhere even better. The job you didn't get, the relationship that didn't work out, the opportunity that slipped away. At the time, they may have felt like losses, but looking back, you can see how they set you up for something greater. It's all about perspective. Two people can go through the same situation, yet one walks away discouraged while the other walks away stronger. The difference isn't in the situation, it's in how they choose to see it. When you shift your perspective, you shift your experience. Imagine a tightrope walker high above the ground. If they focus on the risk, the danger, the possibility of falling, they'll become paralyzed by fear. But if they focus on each step, on moving forward, on maintaining their balance, they'll find the confidence to keep going. In the same way, when we focus on what's going wrong, we become stuck. But when we shift our attention to what's ahead, to the possibilities, to the growth that can come from the challenge, we find the strength to keep moving forward. It's easy to let circumstances dictate our outlook. When things aren't going as planned, we assume they never will. But circumstances are temporary. They don't define your future. Just because you don't see progress yet doesn't mean things aren't shifting. Just because it's taking longer than expected doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Think about a seed planted deep in the soil. On the surface, nothing seems to be happening, but underneath, roots are growing, the foundation is being established, and when the time is right, that seed will break through the ground and flourish. If you judge it too soon, you might think it failed, but in reality, the process was happening all along. Maybe in your own life, You feel like nothing is changing. You've been waiting, working, believing, yet it seems like the breakthrough is nowhere in sight. But what if you're in the middle of the process? What if things are shifting beneath the surface? What if this season is preparing you for something bigger than you imagined? There's an old saying, don't quit before the miracle happens. Too often people give up right before things turn around. They get discouraged, they lose faith, they stop pushing forward, when in reality, they were closer than they thought. The challenge is not a sign to quit, it's a sign to keep going. The most successful people in history weren't the ones who never faced difficulties, they were the ones who refused to let difficulties define them. They chose to see the struggle as part of the journey rather than the end of the road. They understood that every challenge was shaping them. Every setback was teaching them, and every delay was positioning them for something greater. So no matter what you're facing today, remember that your current situation is not the final chapter. The struggle may be real, but so is your strength. The delay may be frustrating, but it's not a denial. The challenge may feel overwhelming, but it's not bigger than the possibilities ahead. Choose to see beyond the difficulty. Choose to believe that this season is shaping you, not stopping you. Choose to trust that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. Because when you shift your focus, you shift your future. When you stop seeing obstacles as the end and start recognizing them as part of the process, you'll find the resilience, the courage, and the determination to step into what's next. Stay strong, stay hopeful, keep believing, because the best is still ahead. Life has a way of presenting moments where we feel like we've reached a standstill. We've put in the effort, stayed committed, done everything we knew to do, yet it seems like nothing is shifting. In these times, it's tempting to settle where we are, to accept that things may never change, and to lose sight of the possibilities ahead. But what if the current season is not a sign of stagnation, but a moment of preparation? What if what feels like a waiting period is actually positioning us for something greater? Too often people let the pressures of life cause them to lower their expectations. They stop believing for more, stop stretching their faith, stop expecting something greater. The dream that once burned bright becomes distant. The vision they once pursued with passion starts to fade. Instead of looking ahead with excitement, they begin to accept that maybe this is all there is. But just because things haven't happened yet, doesn't mean they won't happen. Just because the road has been long doesn't mean the destination isn't worth it. Think about a mountain climber standing at the base of a towering peak. The climb ahead seems steep, the journey long, the obstacles many. If they focus on how difficult it looks, they may talk themselves out of even starting. But if they keep their eyes on the summit, on the reward waiting at the top, they'll find the strength to take the first step. They may stumble along the way, face unexpected challenges, and even feel tempted to turn back. But as long as they keep looking ahead, they'll keep moving forward. The same is true in life. When we focus on the difficulty, we become discouraged. But when we fix our gaze on what's possible, on the opportunities ahead, we gain the strength to keep going. The key is not allowing temporary struggles to turn into permanent mindsets. Challenges come to everyone. The difference between those who rise above and those who stay stuck isn't the absence of struggle. It's the decision to keep moving forward despite it. There's a story of a young woman who had a vision for her future. She knew she was meant for something more, but every step she took seemed to come with obstacles. She faced rejection, disappointment, and delays that made her question whether she was on the right path. At times, she considered giving up, thinking that maybe the dream in her heart was too big. But deep down, she knew that if she stopped now, she'd never see what was possible. So she made a choice, not to focus on how far she had to go, but to focus on taking the next step. Little by little, doors began to open, opportunities appeared, and one day she found herself living the very dream she once thought was impossible. The truth is, nothing great happens overnight. Every achievement, every breakthrough, every moment of success is built on a foundation of perseverance. If you talk to anyone who has reached a high level of success, you'll find that their journey was not without struggle. They faced obstacles, setbacks, and times when it would have been easier to give up. But what set them apart was their decision to keep going, to keep believing, to keep expecting more. It's easy to look at someone who's achieved great things and think they were lucky, that things just worked out for them. But behind every success story is a season of struggle, Behind every moment of victory is a time when they had to choose to keep believing, even when nothing seemed to be happening. What made the difference was their ability to keep looking forward, to keep expecting more, to refuse to settle where they were. Imagine a river flowing toward the ocean. Along the way, it may encounter rocks, twists, and turns that try to slow it down. But the river never stops moving forward. It doesn't allow obstacles to keep it from reaching its destination. It keeps flowing, keeps pushing, keeps carving a path forward. Eventually, it reaches its destination, not because the journey was easy, but because it refused to stop. Your life is the same way. The journey may not always be smooth. There will be challenges, unexpected detours, and times when you wonder if you'll ever get there. But as long as you keep moving, as long as you keep expecting more, you'll reach places you never imagined. The key is not to allow delays, disappointments, or difficulties to convince you to settle where you are. Some of the greatest breakthroughs happen right after the moment when most people would have given up. That's why it's so important to stay hopeful, to keep expecting, to refuse to give in to discouragement. What you've been believing for may not have happened yet, but that doesn't mean it's not on the way. The right opportunity, the right connection, the right moment, it could be closer than you think. There's a famous story about a man who was mining for gold. He had worked for months, digging, searching, giving everything he had. But after a long time without success, he gave up and walked away. What he didn't realize was that just a few feet beyond where he stopped, there was a massive gold vein. If he had just kept going a little longer, he would have found everything he had been searching for. The same principle applies to life. Too often people stop just short of their breakthrough. They let frustration convince them to settle when they were closer than they thought. Maybe you're in a season where things aren't happening as fast as you'd like. Maybe you've faced setbacks that made you question whether it's worth it. But now is not the time to stop believing. Now is not the time to lower your expectations. Now is the time to press forward, to keep expecting, to believe that what's ahead is greater than what's behind. Your story is not over. The dreams in your heart are not there by accident. The vision you have for your future is not impossible. It may take longer than expected. It may require more perseverance than you thought. But if you keep looking ahead, if you keep expecting more, you will step into things beyond what you imagine. So don't settle. Don't let disappointments define your expectations. Don't let delays convince you that it's never going to happen. Keep believing, keep reaching, keep expecting. Because when you refuse to settle where you are, you open yourself up to a future that is bigger, better, and beyond what you ever thought possible. Stay hopeful. Stay strong. Keep expecting. Because the best is still ahead, no matter where you are in life right now. No matter what challenges you're facing or how long you've been waiting for things to change. Remember this. Your story is not over. The delays, the disappointments, the setbacks, they are not the end. They are simply chapters in a greater story, a story that is still unfolding. Too often we allow temporary struggles to convince us to settle. We let past failures shape our future expectations. We look at the obstacles and assume they mean we've reached our limit. But just because you don't see the way right now doesn't mean there isn't one. Just because it's been difficult doesn't mean things won't turn around. Just because you've been waiting longer than expected doesn't mean what you've been believing for isn't on the way. The key is to keep your eyes lifted. Keep looking forward. Keep expecting. Keep believing. Don't let discouragement talk you out of what's possible. Don't let fear convince you to stay where you are. Don't let delays make you give up on what's ahead. You may not see it yet, but the right opportunity, the right connection, the right breakthrough, it's coming. Every challenge, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty is preparing you, it's strengthening you, it's refining you. What may seem like an obstacle today may turn out to be the very thing that leads you to your greatest opportunity. What feels like a setback may actually be positioning you for something beyond what you imagine. So don't settle. Don't stop believing. Don't give up. The best is not behind you. The best is still ahead. Keep your eyes lifted. Keep your heart open and step forward with confidence, knowing that your future is filled with greater things than you've ever dreamed.